Color is just one of the ways that we can depict different materials used in the landscape. So the next one that I want to take a look at is called a hatch. And to demonstrate this, we're going to go ahead and we're going to change the appearance of the patio. Now, the hatch is found over here. It's also in the attributes palette under the fill section. So we're going to change that to hatch right here. And then you can see it comes up with a pattern, and we'll look at how to change that pattern and select the appropriate pattern for the material that we're going to use. But before we do that, I want to take a look at the PCC drafting standards. Included in D2L for you are the PCC drafting standards, and this is a 4-page document. It's pretty succinct about what the drafting standards that the school intends for you to learn are. So please familiarize yourself with that. While we're talking about hatches as well as tiles, that's going to be next up. So hatches and tiles, that's a way to add a pattern to your 2D hardscapes and other objects in your file. And so I wanted to pay attention to what these drafting standards say about hardscapes. And so here's this particular section. It says that textures and patterns can add depth and detail to your plan, but must be used sparingly as to maintain legibility and avoid the graphic from being busy. Hardscape should always have the outline darker than the pattern on the inside, and that the pattern should represent the material being used. And examples of that would be flagstone, pavers, and decking. Patterns also should be roughly to scale of the correct material. These last two bullet points don't apply to drafting on computer, so you can go ahead and just ignore that. So the main thing that I want you to take away is that whatever the interior detail of any of your objects, in this case hardscape, the interior detail should be lighter and less busy. It should look like a material that's being depicted, and that it should be scaled to correspond with the size of the material that's going to be used. So now that we're back in the drawing area, we have applied a hatch, and you can see right here underneath the fill section where we selected hatch, this is telling us that the specific hatch that we're using is aluminum magnesium. So that's not what our patio is going to be made out of. If we want to change the material, all we need to do is click on that box right there. What we're looking at here is a truncated version of the Resource Manager. And what the Resource Manager does is essentially it's a container for different object types that can be reused. In this case, we're working with hatches. So the only thing that the truncated Resource Manager is going to show you are hatches, because we're in the hatch selector right now. Now, a couple of places that you might look for different hatches are, if we pay attention to the pane that's on the left, we have a section right here for open files, and I only have one file open at the moment, so this is showing all of the hatches that have been used in that current file. If we go further down, we have this section for Vectorworks libraries, and you can see these are all of the defaults that came with the software. And so each one of these icons with the black sheet of paper and the white V with the circle, these are different files that came with the software and have the Vectorworks defaults. So you can kind of play around and look at some of the different ones here. The ones that are going to pertain to our hardscape are going to be things like the hardscape patterns, which is the Techo block. Techo block is a brand name, as well as Unilock. And then you also have just regular paving patterns here, and masonry and block surfaces will be helpful. And we're going to go with this block right here. So double click, and then that's going to add it to your file. So we talked about the different things from the PCC drafting standard that we'd like to accomplish. So let's look at how we might change those. And I'm going to start by looking at scale, because to the right of where we selected the specific type of hatch that we'd like to use, to the right of that we have this little icon with the 3 dots, and that is for your fill hatch settings. So if you click on that, you'll get this dialog box, and then up here at the top, if you want to make any changes to it, you'll go ahead and you'll just select Use Local Mapping, and that will allow you to make changes over here. So the I and J length, that's going to be the size of these individual blocks. So if you know that you're working with a particular paver that maybe is 2 feet, then you would enter in 2 feet right there. And this icon right here, these 2 links, these 2 chain links right there, that just means that whatever you change the I length to, it'll also change the J length to. So if you wanted to do something different, you would just deselect that, and then you could do a different length for either one of those. But I'm going to go back and link these together. We're just going to do a 2x2 for this particular pattern. And then the Y offset and the X offset. So in the computer, the x-axis is going to be from left to right, and then the y-axis is going to be from the top to the bottom. And so what that means is, let's say I want to shift this pattern to the right. That's going to be along my x-axis, and let's just go ahead and do 24 inches in that direction. So that's what that looks like. It just allows you to move the pattern in any direction. And then below that, we can rotate it. So if we wanted to do this on a 45-degree angle, we could change the rotation there. Then we can flip the pattern either horizontally or vertically, whatever works for you there. So I'm going to go ahead and change these back. That looks good. And then just click anywhere in the screen to get out of that dialog box. So the other thing that I wanted to show you is we saw how we could move the pattern, we could move the hatch along the X and Y axis, but there's another tool up here in the basic tool palette, and it's called the attribute mapping tool. So if we click on that, what we're going to get is this box here, and it has, let's see, it has a lot of blue handles. It has 8 blue handles, and you can move those handles. So if you wanted to sort of change the scale of the pattern inside, you could just click on one of these corners and drag it either in or out. Now I want to go ahead and keep the 2x2 that we had earlier, so I'm just going to come up here to the edit menu and do undo. And another thing that I'd like you to pay attention to is over here on the right, these are giving you keyboard shortcuts. I am on a PC. If you're on a Mac, your shortcut's going to be a little bit different. But anytime that I want to just undo something quickly, I will hold down Control and Z, and that way I don't have to come up here to this menu every time. So I'll go ahead and undo that so that I go back to my 2x2. And one of the main reasons that you might want to use the attributes mapping tool right here is that you can kind of reposition that where that pattern is starting and ending. And so we can use our keyboard for this as well. What I'm going to do is hold down the Shift key and then use the up arrow key. And I'm going to try to align this pattern so that I kind of starting from a nice place in at least one of these corners. And then, you know, it looks a little shabby down there, but at least we have one corner that's good. So you can sort of play around a little bit with the position of that hatch pattern to make it look nice. So next up, I want to go ahead and add some color to this hatch, as well as de-emphasize the interior line work. And so in order to do that, I'm going to have to go into the Resource Manager. So remember I said over here that when we click on that box right there, we get a truncated version of the Resource Manager. There are all sorts of different resources that we're going to use when we're working with Vectorworks. In this particular case, because we clicked a selector for a hatch specifically, this is only going to show us hatches. But there's another way to look at hatches in your file, and that's the Resource Manager up here. So I'm going to close out of this real quick just to show you how you can access the Resource Manager. If you come up here to the menu at the top and you click on Window, there is a command for palettes. And then if we go down here, we have Resource Manager. So I can just put a check box next to that, and then my Resource Manager pops up. So there's also, let's go back to that. So Windows, Palettes, and then Resource Manager. And remember I told you about keyboard shortcuts. So on a PC, this is going to be Control R. And if you only learn a handful of keyboard shortcuts, toggling the resource manager on and off is going to be one of the first ones that you should learn. And the reason that is, and I'm going to use the keyboard shortcut, for me that's going to be Control R, is that the resource manager can take up a lot of room on your screen. And so we want to minimize that as much as possible. So sometimes that's going to mean toggling it completely on and off. The other thing that we can do to minimize the amount of real estate that it's taking up is, you may have already noticed, but there's this thumbtack over here, and this is auto hide. So if I click on that and the thumbtack goes sideways, that means that when I move my cursor away from the resource manager, it's just going to have this one header right there. And then if I want to access the resource manager, I'll move my cursor over that header and it'll appear. So the other thing that I want to introduce you to the resource manager for is that right up here in this top field right here, you've got a drop-down menu there. A lot of times, especially when you're starting, you'll have it selected for all resources. And so these are showing me all of the resources that I've used in this file that can be used again in other files. So you can see right here, and if you hover your cursor over one of these resources, it'll tell you the type. So we can see that, let me move that there again, get that to appear. So you can see the name of the resource, and then this is a hatch, and this is a hatch, and then this is a line type, and so on and so forth. But sometimes in your files, the resource manager, you'll use hundreds of resources in your file and it will make it hard to find things. So if that happens, you can always click on that drop-down menu and then select the specific type of resource that you're looking for. And so you can see, and it's important to pay attention to what you're selected on over here in the pane on the left. And so we have our open file, our current open file selected, and so these are the hatches that are in that file. So we want to go ahead and add some color and make some changes to the interior line weight for this block. To do that, what you're going to do is you're going to select that particular hatch, then right click and go to Edit. And then in this dialog box, there are lots of changes that you can make here. I'm going to walk you through some of the most basic and helpful ones. So we said that we wanted to add a color to it, so we would just add a fill. And in order to do that, you need to have this box for background fill selected. And then this drop-down menu will allow you to select a color. And then I'm going to go back to the color from our active document, because I did like that gray that we selected for it. I just want it to be included as part of the hatch. So I'll select that color. And then I would like to lighten the interior lines. And so what I'm going to do is here under the pen section, is click that drop-down menu, and then I can select any color. We've already learned how to select color, so I will select that gray. And then I'm actually going to make like a really big shift for you, because I want you to see that when I change that, it's only changing this one line. There are multiple lines that make up this hatch. It's only changing the current one that's selected. So if you want to see how many different lines there are, you come up to this active field up here, and then you can sort of individually change all the different levels where those lines are contained. And there's a fast way if you want to change all of the interior line work at once. So you'll just go to any of the levels, and then you'll pick the level that you'd like to use, and then come down here and select same color right there. And then that changes all of the line work on all of the levels all at once. And so now we have a background color to it, and we also have a lighter color for the interior line work. So let's go ahead and click OK. Once you have edited a hatch, those edits live only in the file in which you created it. So if we wanted to go back to the original hatch that had the white background with the black interior fill without having to re-edit it, we could always go back to the Vectorworks library and find it. So that means that the changes that we made to this block hatch are only reflected in our current open file. It's not reflected in the Vectorworks resource library over here. In fact, you cannot edit the Vectorworks libraries. You can only edit hatches that are in your current open file. So let's come back over here and just take a look at that original hatch. So I'm going to select the patio that we created, click on the hatch selector over here, and then you can see that opened up the Vectorworks library. It's in this masonry and block surfaces, and here's that original hatch that we use. So we'll just double click that. It's going to bring it back into the file. It has the original size of the blocks as well as the white color and the black interior line work. And then if I come back up here to the resource manager and I've selected my current file and I'm only looking at the hatches, you can see that here is the original hatch that came from the Vectorworks library as well as the hatch that I edited. So now both those two hatches live in my current file. And I'm going to go ahead and just double click on that edited hatch because that's the one that we want to look at now.